Yo, what is up, everybody? I've been on vacation all week, and there's a lot to go over that came out this week. The rest of Frostfall, etc. I will be going over the entire set in a later video this week, so hey, subscribe to see that later on this week. But let's just jump into the cards that I haven't previewed yet that have been revealed in the week that I've been gone. So let's just start up with Cockatoodle. A 4/2 for 1 wind. When you cast this Cockatoodle, you can target an opponent's Elestral. That Elestral is suppressed as long as this Cockatoodle is enchanted. I don't think this card's that great, but I do think it is a good toolbox card to add to the wind toolbox. It's good against things like Foamy, where you can stop it from using its floating effect. Infurix maybe. Where I think it shines the most is against things like Tectorus. It basically puts Tectorus back to 3 attack. It trades with Viserys without letting Viserys trigger its search for another Viserys by suppressing both its attack and its search ability on destruction. It trades with other wind cards, like it stops Hydrake from doing its thing. Volcaries, if Volcaries comes more relevant. But I think it's a nice, like, maybe one of or sideboard option against probably most consistently Earth Beaters. I don't see it countering too many other decks. I mean, it could stop Ash Strabbits from being used on repeat. Maybe it's used against Trotagua to stop Trotagua from regenning a ton over time, but I think Trotagua is a little bit more of a combo regen. So I think it's just a sideboard option for Wind. I don't see it doing too much right now on its own. Maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe people start playing with like Island to get the 5 attack and also be suppressing things. Maybe you need to cast an Invoke Rune over a Leonite, so you suppress a Leonite and then throw an Earthquake over it. There's some uses there as well. It does target, so kind of relevant there, and it's not got a crazy high attack stat, but it's a good enough attack stat to be in the running against some of the good floating effects and stuff like that. So it's a good way to get over low statted Elestrals with good abilities. And then its Ascension form is Draco Jodel, a 7/3 for 2 wind. You can expend wind in order to suppress each Elestral on an opponent's field until the end phase. When this Draco Jodel destroys an opponent's suppressed Elestral in battle, that opponent must expend 3. I don't know how to feel about this. Blanket suppressing everything sounds great, but in reality you're probably only hitting 1, maybe 2 cards at a time, but you are making them expend 3 if it destroys them. But then it kind of becomes a Javelantis situation where you have to still connect with it to do the damage. There might be other ways to do that damage, so I don't really see this being super great. I could see it being play with like Chains of Prometheus and stuff existing, but the hardest part about this card being useful is it has to connect to do the damage. Blanket suppressing for 1 wind is pretty decent against, again, like Earth Beaters, kind of like with Cockatoodle, but I don't see this being super great, and it's probably just going to get answered by a counter rune, because yeah, you're hitting the Elestrals, but generally counter runes are the issue. Again, there might be options for you with like Helios Chariot Ride and Chains of Prometheus is to make this connect and make it worth the extra damage. And if you're hitting something in attack position, you're doing like 4 damage maybe. That is pretty aggressive, but you have to work to make it work, and I don't think that the things you have to kind of leaps you have to make this work well is worth it in your deck building over other wind options. I don't think it's that great. Moving on, Terra Sail. 7/3 for 1 wind, 1 water. You can nexus a wind or a water. So this is, I think, the first card that can actually nexus different elements. That's not Omni, I guess you could say. And when you do, you can special cast a Nemisail from your hand or deck. I don't know how good this is. So it's a 2-cost Nexus Celestial that can nexus either of its elements, which is pretty good. And both those elements have really good recovery effects with Trotagua and Nemisail to go with this. However, you're not going to want to run both Poseidon and Aeolus in the same deck, so I don't see nexusing either or being super relevant. So we can just say Nexus is 1, and you want to nexus this to Pigas, to an Nemisail, but you have to send this first, so you have to have 2 Elestrals in play starting your turn, send this over 1, and then nexus to another to make it really, really useful. I don't know how great that's going to be. It's got a decent attack stat for a 2-drop, and it effectively also has a regen effect by special casting Nemisail from your hand or deck. So it's Nexus 1, get a body on board that can't really do much, and regen 2 wind. I don't know how good that would be. It's nice that it doesn't need to attack, which is relevant. Not needing to attack to use the ability effectively is good, since it's not going to run things like Shield and Gorgons, and it's generally immune to Tsunami. So I think it's a good card. I just don't think it's a great card because the bodies it's putting on board aren't really relevant. So it's a 2 cost that you can Nexus and regen 2 with. Sort of. I don't know if that's good enough for a 2 cost. It's nice to go super wide and win for sure, but this will probably eat an Earthquake, and then like a Tectorus or a Necrof or anything will run over the Nemi Sail on top of it as well. And it's so hard to like really set up for. That's the biggest issue. Like the effects combined are fine, but setting up for this where you need a Divine Rune, you need multiple Elestrals in play, and you need to be able to Nexus to something relevant, I don't think it's good enough there. But it might see like a one of inclusion somewhere in like a Win Nexus file if you can get it out consistently. I think getting it out is the hard part unless you tad puff it, but then you're building so much weirdness around the deck to try to just play Terra Sail. I kind of like Draco Jodel. I don't know if building a deck around this to make this work efficiently is the best play, but it could work. I just don't know if it's efficient enough. Moss Station, a 4/1 for 1 Earth. This Moss Station gets 2 attack for each Earth enchanting it. During end phase, you must change this Moss Station to defense if it attacked this turn. This is an interesting card. So it's effectively going to be a 6/1 when you play it, and it can kind of sit in attack position as a 6/1 wall in attack position. Kind of similar to putting a Moss Station in defense position as a 6 defenser. This doesn't need to pay to switch stats, but it's going to be forced into defense at the end of turn if you do anything with it. I don't know where this will see play. I definitely think it's a solid card just to early game get over some of the aggressive Elestrals in like 5 guys or Earth Beaters, etc. And I think you might be able to like squeeze some kind of Earth Nexus thing with Altar, because you can use Altar to put it back in attack position and Nexus an extra Earth to it when your opponent attacks it to kind of cheese them out in a sense. But I don't know otherwise what you do with this card. I mean, maybe Earth Beaters takes it and uses the back row to kind of keep a controlling board presence, but I don't know the home for this card. I think it's a solid card. I think there's some funny shenanigans you can do with Altar with it. But other than that, I think that's a little bit too niche. Good attack. Like that's relevant. It can sit into attack position and be a wall in attack position. I think you'd rather have a defense position wall like Station that can just be misenchanted as a wall to go into Sonic Core or whatnot in your next turn. This you can't do that with. There's no Earth Elestrals really, except maybe Gigaflor you want to ascend into, but I don't think these go in the same deck. I think that's a little too clunky there. Maybe they do. But yeah, so my Station, pretty decent. I just don't see a home for it right now. 1 drop with good attack is always relevant. Alright, next up is Cyprong, a 4/3 for 1 Earth. When this Cyprong is in attack position and an Elestral on your field is destroyed in battle, you can return each Earth that was enchanting that Elestral from your Underworld to your Spirit deck. This is a solid recovery option in Earth. However, I don't think it's that great. I mean, maybe you could argue this in the fully forced kind of stadium beatdown deck in Earth again, where you put in attack position, you hit over something, and this could basically be a free costed Elestral if you trade a 5 attack with it, or if you have like some Viserys and other attack position Earth Elestrals in play. This could be good for them. But that means you have to have a pretty wide board state, and if you have a pretty wide board state in Earth in attack position, you are probably already ahead. So in that respect, I don't think this is good. I think it's this kind of recovery card that lets you stay ahead when you're already winning. And if you're already winning, you don't need to stay ahead. I could see maybe a 1-of in Earth if it had more like consistent invoke speed search that you can use repeatedly, but right now it's a little slow. You don't really want to find this with the Rummagem unless you're trying to do like some weird Rummagem aggro thing where you just find it with all your little Rummagems and try to Earthquake through your opponent. Like, I don't know. Again, you need a board state to have this be really effective. And if you have a board state that this is going to be really good for, then you're probably already winning and ahead. But it's a cool card. I like it. But I don't think it's that great. Moving on, the Mor Frost. This is the really interesting part where we're going to hopefully not spend too much time in it. I'm trying to go quickly through all these because we have a lot to go through. And the next 6 cards, or next 7 cards, are the most exciting cards in the set, I would think. The Mor Frost Lichen Form is a 2/3 for 1 Frost. Let's just stop there for a second. So, titles. We spoke to this about Ambrosia a little bit, so you can have any amount of Mor Frost with different titles. So there's 4 different title Mor Frost. You can have up to 12 Mor Frost in your deck as long as you don't have more than 3 of each title. So you can have 3 Lichen Form, 3 Terraform, 3 Indis, 3 A-Bomb, all in the same deck. We'll go over all those shortly, but you can run 12 Mor Frost in your deck, worth to remember. The 2/3 for 1 Frost, you can expend Frost and discard this Mor Frost in order to search deck for 2 Mor Frost that are not Lichen Form and add them to your hand. So kind of like Amp Up, I think there's a pretty clear, obvious, like it's Amp Up in Mor Frost form. You can expend Frost, discard it, like Amp Up would just expend Thunder and discard it to find 2 more Mor Frost. It's literally just Amp Up in Mor Frost form. And as enchant, that's pretty powerful. This is basically a 1 cost draw 2, but or rather it's a 1 cost search 2. Like that's even better. It's just really good in the Mor Frost deck to just find whatever 2 Mor Frost you want. You're always going to want this in your opening hand. If you have 2 of these in your opening hand, you are sailing to probably victory because that's a lot of good power in your hand. But yes, this is just a really good card. It's searching 2 cards in your Mor Frost deck. Is the Mor Frost deck good? We'll go over shortly, but this is really powerful. It is probably the strongest Mor Frost in the game, just on the benefit that it can set up whatever you're trying to do in Mor Frost. Let's jump into the next Mor Frost and go a little bit further into archetype. Indis form, it's 2/1 for 1 Frost. When you cast this, you can expend 1 Frost to search your deck for 2 Mor Frost and send them to your underworld. When this Mor Frost is destroyed in battle, you can target and destroy a face-down rune. So, if you do Lichen Form, get this, expend another Frost, and then start dumping Mor Frost into your underworld. So now you have Mor Frost in your hand, you have Mor Frost in your underworld. Why do you want Mor Frost in your underworld? We'll get to in a moment, but on top of that, you can use things like Kione to now recover those Mor Frost to your hand. Maybe Frost Sticks to special cast whatever Mor Frost you just sent, also from underworld back into play. And then the fact that this destroys face-down runes in battle, or rather when it's destroyed in battle, is really powerful. That means if your opponent decides to go set, play a 3 attacker, attack over Indis form, they can basically destroy one of your face-downs that you just set that turn without too much. It's kind of like P-Gust, but P-Gust on your turn. Like if your opponent P-Gust you as if it was instant speed or counter speed, you have a little control over it where you can potentially not attack over Mor Frost. So you can set them and then let this Indis sit down. But you don't want Indis sticking around because they'll probably send it to A-Bomb, which we'll get to last. And then we have Mor Frost Terraform. I spoke on this briefly. We're going to talk about it again because we have more than Mor Frost to go with it. I think this is probably the worst Mor Frost out of the 4. But it is nice to have if your opponent targets a Mor Frost you already have in play and you happen to have this in your hand. Maybe you just keep recovering with Kione and pulling it back. But it gets 1 attack, or it gives your opponent's Elestrals 1 attack less for each Frost enchanting it. You're not going to be able to pump a bunch of Frost on this, I don't think. And when a player activates a card effect that targets 1 or more Mor Frost, discard a Mor Frost in order to negate the effect and destroy that card. You have to have this in play, so you could just like, you're basically, this is what you're trying to discard into your underworld as much as possible and just pitch it to your underworld because it's the worst one. On top of Lichen, etc., to pump up your Abominable. Let's just jump into Abominable right now, and we'll talk about the whole archetype real fast. So Abominable form, it's a 1/3 for 1 Frost. This is the payoff for the Mor Frost deck, and it gets 1 attack for every Mor Frost in your underworld. So you can get up to 13 attack with, or rather no, be up to 12 attack because this has to be in play. So it's 11 Mor Frost in your underworld. You can disenchant 1 Frost from this Mor Frost and special cast a Mor Frost that is not Abominable from your underworld. So if your opponent decides to leave your Indis in play, you can ascend over the Indis and then perhaps use this and bring Indis back. This is the payoff. It's a big beat stick Mor Frost that's difficult to deal with, and it will keep coming back because your opponent's probably going to search them out with Lichen and just keep dropping them, recovering them with Kione, etc. Is the Mor Frost deck going to be good enough? And I think it's going to be a deck where when your opponent starts using it, you know what they're on, you know exactly what you have to stop and what you're dealing with. So in that sense, it's a bad deck because your opponent generally always knows what you're doing. However, I think Mor Frost Abominable form gets so massive that it will always be relevant, and I believe that Mor Frost is going to be a deck of just, I will eventually lose to Mor Frost, because they're just going to be able to keep playing Abominable form over and over again by recovering out of their underworld with the Frost tools that recover from the underworld, like Frostix, like Hione, etc., and then just kind of beat you down with 1 or 2 Abominable forms over the course of a few turns. So you know what you're going to have to stop in the deck, but the deck's going to be able to keep recurring its pieces over and over again really consistently until it basically runs out of gas, which will take a while because it's a pretty efficient, low-costing archetype, being all 1 cost. Hione's 1 cost, return it to hand, etc. But yeah, I think it's going to be a really fun archetype. I'm interested to see where it goes, but I do think it's going to be pretty good, just on the basis of it's going to be super uber consistent compared to a lot of other decks right now because of all the search tools to get things into hand and underworld, and Hione synergizes really well with all of the 4 pieces. That's my take. I don't know if you need to run all 12 copies total of everything, but you probably will. Alright, so that's Mor Frost. We're going to move on to the next spicy bits. Morlith, or rather all the Liths. So there's one for Frost, Earth, and Fire. We'll start with the Ice one with Morlith, a 6/4 for 2 Frost. This Morlith can be normal cast with 2 Frost if an opponent has fewer Elestrals in their underworld than you do. Take a pause right here. So you can use your normal cast to cast this 2-drop, which is extremely relevant. But you have to normal cast it with the correct elements. You can't misenchant it. That is relevant. And only if they meet the trigger. So all these lists have the ability to be normal cast if they meet a certain requirement. And then you can just normal cast a 2-drop into play with good stats. So it's a 6/4. Really relevant stats. Gets over a lot of the 6-attack stuff. Just powerful stuff. But also, when you cast this Morlith, you must send the top 5 cards from your deck to your underworld. So it's another card that likes to just kind of dump cards from deck into underworld. We see a lot of underworld play with Frostfall, with Frost in general, with Hione and Frostix. I don't think there's enough tools right now to make self-milling worth it. I mean, I don't think Mor Frost are going to want self-mill. There's some combo stuff, but the combo stuff, you still need to find the pieces to get into your underworld. So is this good enough? I'm not sure. You can in theory play Avalanche turn 1, play the RNG game where your 3 cards have 2 Elestrals, your opponent only mills 1, and you can special cast, or rather normal cast this, not a special cast. The best thing going for it right now is it's a 6/4. 6/4 is a really good stat line. You could potentially play it after your opponent does some shenanigans, or maybe you're playing defensively, they crack over your defense Elestral, and then you play this on your second turn as a 6/4 with 2 spirits on it. Then maybe ascend into something else later on. There's no 3-drops I want to send this into except maybe Penguin, maybe Cryo Scorch, but I don't think this fits in the same deck as either of those. It's a 6/4 attacker that if you're playing defensively, you might be able to just drop on your opponent, but you don't want to be playing defensively without a better plan, I think. So it's a good card. I just, until self-mill Frost is more relevant, or it gets more like cards and effects that bring stuff from the underworld, it's going to be a bit before this sees a lot of play, but it is pretty interesting to look at. Next up we have Verth, a 3/7 for 2 Earth. This Verth can be normal cast with 2 Earth if an opponent has at least 4 more spirits in their spirit deck than you do. So if you're lower in spirits than your opponent, you can normal cast this instead of a 1-drop. When you cast this Verth, you can return up to 4 Earth from your underworld to your spirit deck, so you gotta be playing a lot of Earth for this deck. It definitely doesn't go into Earth beaters because it's not a beater in itself, and there's nothing in the 3-cost slot that I think Earth wants to go into except Centaur. But Centaur doesn't see a lot of play. It'd be a little clunky to just kind of hope that you can get this into play and ascend it over into Centaur. However, I do think where this will see decent play, or the most use out of it you can get, is in a fully forced deck that also runs a lot of Nectar of the Gods, drops of Liths, etc., where you can purposely lower your spirit total to cast this. So perhaps you're going first, turn 1. You go Nectar of the Gods, drops of Liths, Verth. You just drew an extra card, mulliganed, and basically for free, and you get this in play and you're back at 18 spirits. So I think there's a case to be made that if you're going first, this is a great going first card where you can just dump a bunch of spirits from Invoke Runes, drop into play, recover it all. Anything else, I don't see it being useful, maybe in some weird reanimator strategy, because it will recover spirits that you use for Rise from the Ashes on it. That's not a great deck though. So I think it has some use. I think it's a great going first card, but if you're not going first, well, it kind of whiffs a lot. It might just sit in your hand. It doesn't attack. It's just going to sit in defense as a big wall, which ideally you'd want to then ascend something into it. There's not a ton of things you really want to go into the 3-drops. It's a big wall though, and it recovers spirits, which is relevant. Again, I think if you're going first, it can dump a lot of spirits. And lastly, this is probably the best card in the set. I don't see why it wouldn't be. It's really powerful. So let's just Lalith, 6/4, 2 fire. This Lalith can be normal cast with 2 fire if an opponent has at least 2 or more enchanting spirits than you do. When you cast this Lalith, you can destroy a rune. So starting off, destroying a rune is great. Fire was missing that big time. Now it has that. Extremely relevant. The normal cast trigger is pretty easy to... I mean, your opponent plays like Spark It, or maybe not Spark because they'll rip this from your hand right away, but they're playing a Divine Rune and anything else. This is online turn 2. It's a great going second card because you can pop it in play, pop a face down, and then attack over an Elestral, and all of a sudden you just turn this into a pretty consistent 2-for-1 going second. Going first is a little bit clunkier, but again, your opponent might just drop an Aeolus on their turn with extra spirits, and then you have 1 spirit on play because your 1-drop that you played turn 1. Maybe that gets destroyed and you followed up with the Lalith. I really think this is going to be the easiest thing to cast out of all the Liths so far. And it's basically a P-Gust and a 2-drop with good stats. So that's extremely relevant. We all know P-Gust sees a decent amount of play. Destroying runes is great. Having good stats is great. Good stats destroy runes means you're probably 2-for-1ing pretty consistently in the early game with this. In the mid to late game, it might trade 2-for-1. This might go 3-for-1. It's just a really powerful, strong, just destroy a defensive tool, hit an Elestral, or if it comes in play and let's say targets Gorgon's Gaze, your opponent's going to have to Gorgon's Gaze early. Maybe you already have another card still in play because you used the Divine Rune against it. It pops Divine Rune, so it's a burn card. Like, there's so much this thing can do. It's very powerful, it's simple, and I think it's going to be seeing a lot of play in even decks that aren't fire because it's just like resting on your laurels, this cheap, efficient removal. This is pretty efficient, kind of cheap removal for 2 cards at the same time with not too difficult of a casting requirement to activate it. I think it's great. It might be the best card in the set. Yeah, so that's where I am for the entirety of Frostfall. I will go over every card in a tier list sometime this week. So again, like and subscribe to see that later. And talk to you guys next video.